And that's when you have the consequences start to be effective. Yeah. So I'm not saying I have all the answers, I'm just attempting to share my mana'o here and from my experience. But again, it's looking at the bigger context of how things are. And once you get it, then you kind of know where you gotta go. But where you gotta go is where you know you need to go. It's not dependent upon everybody else telling you gotta go now. It's if it's illegal, you're affected by it, then you gotta deal with it. If I'm arrested and I'm brought up on charges, I can make my defense whether I'm an American citizen, this court doesn't have jurisdiction. And I cite the executive agreement, that's a federal matter. Now the prosecution has to prove the executive agreement doesn't exist, which is a federal matter, and they can't. See, I can use that argument even if I'm not a Hawaiian, because it's a legal issue. Yeah, so it's actually getting out there. Yeah.
When Hawaii is able to take over its own sovereignty, its own government, what is going to be implemented as far as how the government's going to be chosen? Is it going to be by district, representation? But then who's going to decide who the main figurehead is?
No, that's a very good question. It's actually all determined by Hawaiian law.
And what is that?
Well, the executive agreement entered into between the Queen and the President. Remember, Hawaii is a constitutional monarchy, and the United States is a constitutional republic. So there's laws that regulate and inhibit authority. When the President of the United States restores the government back to where it was before the U.S. troops landed, it brings into everything that existed at that particular time, but what also comes into place, the Bene Constitution, because the real revolution began in '87. Blunt actually determined that also. So Hawaii as a constitutional monarchy, you already have gubernatorial districts, you have all that stuff. Now mind you, when you talk about occupation though, that's step 3, okay? In the law of occupation, so I used to be a captain in artillery, I was in the field artillery, so I understand the law of occupation according to the Hague and Geneva Conventions. That's how we're trained. Basically what happens is, when one government is overthrown in another country, okay, there is no body there to enforce the laws of that country. So as a consequence of the overthrow of the government, the military assumes that temporary role as the provisional government. In Iraq, you saw that happen. The Coalition Provisional Authority with Bremer, that was an executive function of the United States military to administer Iraqi law. And then what happens is, that government then will facilitate the restoration of the government of Iraq, and then authority transferred, and then coalition forces leave. For Hawaii, that executive agreement to restore has already established. What we don't have here is the administration of Hawaiian law according to the Hague and Geneva Conventions. That's a military matter. That's not us. And that's going to happen whether we like it or not. The U.S. military is going to have to establish a military government to establish Hawaiian Kingdom law, no different than how they administered Spanish law in the Spanish colonies of Guam and the Philippines. Same concept. So as we take it from the national matter of the United States, meaning a federal issue with the executive agreement, we still have to keep it in context of the law of occupation. So the first thing is to get the U.S. military to administer Hawaiian law by establishing a military government, and then getting ready to enforce the executive agreement, which is restoration, and then they go home. That's how it's supposed to be. Yeah, that's just doctrine. The problem is we didn't know that. We're just starting to figure it out.
Hold on, Dex first, and then hold on.
Actually, I agree with everything Keanu says, but what I want to do is, I said, a lot of us want to be proactive. That's why you asked what we can do. And besides agreeing with Keanu, what we can all do is in our own little way. I know, for example, Huipu sent out a petition opposing the Akaka bill a few years back. Over 2,000 people signed. Maybe it's not as easy, but perhaps each and every one of you can sign a little letter. Perhaps go to your ohana, have the ohana sign that letter. Send it to somebody like Maile, Hawaiian Civic Clubs, where they can be the repository of all these petitions. We can today do our own Ku'e petition by having it. Maybe we don't have to go island by island, but each of you can sign a letter with your ohana, send it to Maile, to show that as a people, we still agree with what Keanu says, and we oppose the Akaka bill, or oppose any other continuing attempt to annex Hawaii.
I agree, that's an excellent solution.
No, can I qualify that though? Because that's good that Dexter brought that up. When you oppose the Akaka bill, explain why. Just don't oppose it. Explain why, because it's in violation of the executive agreement signed in 1893. See, then you start linking it to everything. Yeah. Then it doesn't become political rhetoric. It's more like you're actually saying follow the law.
Right.
Yeah, that's more powerful.
Just a simple idea of following today what we just did today. You know, like whatever date it is today, back in the Hilo Mall, We need to be doing that today, as if yesterday was just yesterday. You know, like, and not forget this period of time when we have lost identity of the real issues. So continue what the women were doing.
No, you guys got to remember too, because I heard this being told by up at UH. The Women's League was the same and at par with the Men's League. A lot of people think, and I've heard this up at Hawaiian Studies, they think that the Hawaiian Patriotic League was just women. They didn't realize that it was both men and women. So you have petitions that have the presidents of both, of the same organization, but just the women and the men, they're signing. So you got Kuahilani Campbell signing with Aiman Avahi. The other one you have James Kaulia signing, and that's all part of the petition. So it was a concerted effort by all. So it happened all over the place. And if anything, our kupuna back then knew what happened, and they knew how to address it. They were not in the middle of recovering their memory. They fully understood who they were and what needed to be done. For us, we have added kaumaha. We're still trying to figure it out, and then we feel we got to do something. Yeah, so it's that balance that needs to be found, but I think everybody needs to find their own balance. Yeah.
I have a problem with that because in Iraq, even though USA is going through the process of setting up a government, the government that's setting up is their puppet government. And basically, it's really not making any difference. It's coming from a bogus government set up by the US and backed by their power.
You know, that's where our situation is completely different. For one, we don't have the violence that was going on in Iraq. Okay, that's number one. Number two, that creation of that federal government in Iraq, which is supposed to be the successor of the Coalition Provisional Authority, which already happened, okay? There are arguments that that was American-made and American-forced. Yeah, I'm not denying that. But what we have is an executive agreement already speaking to the particulars of the restoration of that government. So you're not leaving it to the military, a discretion to create the government in the way they like. We're going right back to the executive agreement. It's just that that executive agreement was entered into in 1893, not complied with, and then in 1898 we get occupied, and then everything gets confusing.
Raised.
Yeah, then it has to come, we got to go back to what is the executive agreement, because it's specific. Well, it's a legal, it's a government that's laid out. So we don't have to worry about trying to create one. The problem is, how do we get the U.S. military to administer Hawaiian law?
Well, that's my second part of the question is, how far can you trust in the U.S. military?
Well, I was in the military, so I can speak from experience. You just got to hold them accountable. But if you don't understand how they operate, how are you going to hold them accountable? That's why you need to understand how the regulations work, the chain of command, and all these kind of things. That's really all it is. But I'm not saying that's simple. I'm saying that's the doctrine. But I think what adds to this is the confusion. Yeah, it's just the confusion.
I just got through with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and I see how they operate.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is an American piece of legislation. It's a committee. That's like the, what do you call it? The environmental impact statements. That's congressional. That's not international. The Hague and Geneva Conventions are separate. That's very different. So again, it's learning to use the appropriate terminology. So if you speak to the staff judge advocate, in this case it was Colonel Herring, okay, Colonel James Herring. He's a staff judge advocate, United States Army Pacific. I briefed them at Wheeler Courthouse on the law of occupation. But everybody else here is talking about American law, so it becomes someplace where they can talk that's safe. That's why it's safe. When you start talking Article 43 of the Hague Convention, the non-compliance of Article 52 and 53 because of the depleted uranium, okay, now you're going to catch their attention, but nobody's talking that. Because we're still recovering our memory. We're still using environmental impact statement. It still becomes, you know, it's like we're contesting all the time. Yeah, so it's just part of recovering memory. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's a good way to measure how far you got to go to actually get the attention of them, or just to add to the confusion. Because if I'm on their side, and the more you talk to me about congressional legislation, the more you talk to me about the environmental impact statement, the safer I feel. Now I can play the game in there, and it's safe for me. Once you start pulling in the other stuff, then it gets a little, you know, testy. But again, it's just recovering our memory. So everybody's at a particular stage of recovery, and it's all good.